Okay, so let's do a test. Okay, so this is working. And let's switch over to this. Okay, so that should be everything pretty much ready to start. So hello to everyone who is here in chat so far. I assume more people will join as we kind of get going properly. So yeah, like I've said kind of during the week in terms of planning for this stream, the idea is we're going to do the top 10 non-bender fighter list, and then we'll do sort of an avatar Q&A style thing afterwards where you guys can just ask questions, bring up topics that you want me to discuss, and we'll just do that for the end. I'm assuming that this list probably won't take as long to do as some of the bender lists, especially last week's list, but we'll do our best to get through it, of course. So yeah, here's the list, of course. This is what we're going to be filling in. It's not filled out right now. Of course, I have my ideas already. I've done this in the past, but right now it's blank. We have our shortlist here, which I'll get to in a second. But I suppose first we have some rules to kind of go over. So they're a little bit different, I think, for the non-benders here. So number one is just no benders on the list. This is the non-bender list, so because of that, we are not even considering benders who have good non-bender fighting skills. So unfortunately, this means no Zuko, even though he probably is the main candidate who would make the list. So no Rangi or anyone like that who we know has good sort of skills, even not using their bending. So only the non-benders here. So we are considering the character as having sort of all the equipment that we see them use. That would be part of their sort of regular loadout. So what that means is, of course, for say Sokka, we're considering that he's always going to have his boomerang with him, and he's always going to have his sword with him. That's him with his sort of best, loadout. Now, we obviously know from the comics he doesn't have the sword anymore, but we know from the Old Friends poster that he gets it back. So, I don't think it's fair to like take that away from Sokka. And so like Asami go in with the shock gloves and so on. The third rule here is just to get across the idea that we are not considering mech suits or animal companions as being equipment. In this case, I feel the suit or the animal is the combatant more than the non-bender themselves. So this is why you won't see a Zhu Li. It's why you won't see like a Hiroshi or someone like that make the list, because they are characters who, as far as we're aware, their non-bender skill comes from being able to pilot a mech pretty well. So it also means for, say, someone like June, who is going to be on the short list, Nyla is not going to be considered to be sort of like part of her kind of equipment. It's just June on her own. No animal companion to back them up. I think that's sort of the fairest way to actually cover it. 4 and 5 are like the previous list, which is just with regards to how we're considering kind of feats basically. So the strongest candidates will have strong feats that we see on screen, a strong reputation of like this character is said to be very good, and that their skill set sort of stands out as being unique compared to others. 5 is obviously kind of one of the kind of maybe more controversial ones. We don't really use it too much, but it's there if we need it. Some consideration will be given to try and treat characters as being in their prime. This will mainly be to avoid undervaluing younger characters just because of their age. And then 6, spiritually enhanced characters will only be considered for their actions pre-becoming enhanced. So this is pretty much the Tokuga rule. We are considering Tokuga here before he gets morphed by the dragon eel spirit. So we're not considering Tokuga on this list to have the skills and abilities that come from his spirit morphing. It's about him before then. So they're the rules. And let's get into the short list here. So here is most of the list. You can see we have quite a few people here, and it even goes down further than this. So quickly going through the names. So we have Seifel and Foreshadows Guan from the Kyoshi novels. We have Asami, the Lieutenant, Tokuga, a generic equalist chi blocker. We have Jet, Longshot, Smellerbee, Sneers, the Duke, Pipsqueak, Utor, Ogode, Kachi, Yelu, Vashir, Gilak, Bato, Hakoda, Sokka, Suki, Piandao, June, Mei, Ty Lee, and then also the Ganjin leader and the Zhang leader. There are other non-bender fighters out there, but in terms of characters who are in any way, I think, going to potentially make the top 10 list in the end, I think this pretty much covers it. So, immediately in the chat, like, let me know if anyone springs to mind who we've completely forgotten here. I put out a post earlier on in the week to the channel members to kind of, see if the list was good. And for the most part, I didn't really feel I had necessarily missed anyone out that was going to kind of make the list. Or else there are sort of equivalent characters already on the list who basically have the exact same skill set. So there's that. So yeah, what about the archers, the Yuyan archers? Vashir is a Yuyan archer. So we are considering him the Yuyan archer representative in the same way we are considering sort of Suki the standard Kyoshi warrior representative. So that's why we don't have just a standard Yuyan archer, and it's why there's no standard Kyoshi warrior, because we include it here. Ty Lee, I think, is unique enough on her own, even though she's now a Kyoshi warrior, to where she also has to be considered. But yeah, Vashir is the Yuyan archer guy. So, it's up to you about whether or not you consider him to be one of their best. Is he the good representative of them or not? But he's in the search. Ozai chose him to go on that search in that book. He was clearly one of their best. And obviously, because he failed on that mission, because it was spiritual stuff in play, he was sort of, obviously exiled from the Yuyan archers. But still, he's a member of the Rough Rhinos. He is still a Yuyan archer. So that's what we're going to be considering. So, yeah, it definitely would be nice to know the names of the other Kyoshi warriors. But there's that. That's an interesting question. No, Boomy 2. So yeah, Boomy prior to becoming an airbender. It's one of those ones where, like, probably, yeah, he should be on the shortlist, but I don't really think he's in contention for a final 10 slot. He has that sort of Jar Jar Binks magic going on, where he sort of succeeds by by his unique approach and stuff like that, rather than necessarily a superb skill set. More of a leader character, I suppose, but still, yes, roughly worth mentioning. Yeah, he probably should have made the shortlist. Yeah, and then, like, Zahir, the thing with Zahir is that even though we are told about how, he's this skilled martial artist prior to getting airbending, we don't see any of it. And it's just like he's here at this point in time when he is a non-bender, and we're told about events that sort of involve him, but we know nothing about the details of what he did or did not do during these moments. So I don't think we can consider him. So I think Zahir is one where, yeah, maybe he should have been here on the list, but we have to, I think, eliminate him straight away, in the same way we got rid of Guru Lahima quite early on the airbender list. It's just a case of Zahir's skills as a non-bender fighter. I think it's a little unfair to try and just work on, figure out what those skills are from him as an airbender. Yeah, I think that's where it is. Realistically, I suppose you have to consider, just based off reputation, he's probably relatively high up, but I don't think we're told enough details about him to even justify that. So I think it's pretty fair to just not really consider Zahir too much. So Very quickly, these are the only two Kyoshi characters I could think of that are decent non-bender fighters. So, in case you're wondering who these are, Seifel is a swordsman. He goes with Jianju to Hujiang. He's obviously, this is where in the book where Jianju is investigating the shearshoes that he sent, and they are ambushed by Dao Fei, who have like hidden themselves on the outskirts of Hujiang, and so Jianju and his guards are ambushed. A lot of the guards get killed, but Seifel actually survives. And they get across in the book that he killed 3 non-bender Dao Fei around him, and Jianju praises him immediately after this as like the only 2 survivors, that like, you know, there's room on my team for a quick blade like you. And then the only other thing with Seifel in the book is Jianju eventually figures out that Seifel is actually a guard working for his rival Hui, and so he has him, you know, taken care of. He takes care of him himself. The fight happens off screen, but it's implied that basically they both kind of lunge at each other. Jianju gets a cut. I forget if it's on his neck or on his cheek, but he gets cut by Seifel, and then Seifel is obviously dead because he doesn't appear in the book after that point. So, tricky opponent here, but he was killed by Jianju. Not that that's really a problem, but still somewhat notable. Foreshadows Guan is the Leitai champion that Rangi fights in the book. They get across, he's kind of like a big guy. He has the kind of brute strength thing going on. He is outclassed by Rangi in a non-bender fight. He gets one good hit in on her that nearly knocks her out, but, you know, he is taken out by Rangi without much kind of issue. So there's that. There's also North and South Chi blocker. Yeah, like the thing with the Chi blockers is that, yeah, we could consider Thawd, we could consider the 2 kids who Thawd teaches, we could consider the guards that Suki teaches in Imbalance, but I think we have the Chi blockers covered because, like, Tokuga has Chi blocking. Equalist Chi blockers, I think, roughly make up the, you know, characters who are mainly focused on Chi blocking, as well as Tai Li, of course. So yeah, I think we can for sure get rid of Guan. He's not going to be in this at all. Seifel, I think we'll keep here for now, just to see if there's anyone who kind of comes up against him. Asami, we're definitely considering for the end. The Lieutenant, we are going to be considering for the end. I think Tokuga is definitely skilled enough to where we can't eliminate him right now. I also wouldn't feel particularly comfortable with just getting rid of the Equalist Chi blocker right now, though I have a feeling it might end up falling off towards the end. Jet, we're considering towards the end. Same with Longshot. I think some of these other Freedom Fighter members are going to go straight away. So obviously in the chat, let me know if you don't agree with some of these deletions here. So I don't think Smellerby is going to be a top 10. Skilled with knives as more of a kind of scout type character, but I don't see her competing against some of the higher up non-bender fighters that we have. Sneers, again, it's unfortunate with the likes of Sneers and some of these like bigger characters that it doesn't really seem like the big strong characters as non-bender fighters are all that valuable. In the likes of Guan, Sneers, Pipsqueak, the heavier hitters, the ones that don't have the skilled technique don't seem to stand out that much, unfortunately. So Sneers seems to have like axes as his weapon of choice, and he's a kind of bigger character, but doesn't have a lot going on, unfortunately. So we can get rid of Sneers. The Duke and Pipsqueak are more of a tag team, and while they work well together, of course, there's nothing really going on here. Same with Pipsqueak, big guy, but I don't see how, you know, I probably put Guan ahead of Pipsqueak just on his own. Utor gets actually a little bit of spotlight in, I think it's the Rift, but again, he's fighting Aang. He has no chance. The Rough Rhinos get kind of made fun of a little bit in the book with the way things go, but he's meant to be a decent sort of big guy, but nothing really going on here. Utor goes away. And I think the same for the rest of the Rough Rhinos. Ogode, Kachi, Yalu, they have to go, unfortunately. Again, they have their own sort of weapon focus, of course, which is quite nice. But, Yalu's the explosive expert. Yeah, they really were not made out to be that impressive in the Rift at all. We'll keep Vashir for now, but I have a feeling we're going to end up getting rid of him anyway. Again, we'll keep Gilak for now. I think Bato probably goes. I don't think we see him fight enough. And I think just from the content that we have, I think Gilak and Hakoda are going to stand out more as our Water Tribe warriors. So I think we can get rid of Bato pretty easily. Sokka is going to be considered for the end list. Suki, of course. Piandao, of course. Is June just gone because we're not considering Nyla to be like her piece of equipment, basically? June on her own, is there anything there? Like, obviously she's really strong. She wins the arm wrestling contest, and like obviously can handle herself. But I think without Nyla, there's nothing particularly fancy here. She has the whip as well. But I don't think, again, considering some of the characters we have here, I don't think she's really up to much. So we will get rid of June. May, we are going to be considering. Tylee, of course, we're going to be considering. And look, the two leaders of the tribes, they are skilled like swordsmen and women. It's unfortunate that they are the characters in the episode that a lot of fans don't like too much. They stand out quite well, I think, as non-bender fighters, in that they put the effort in to give them unique styles of like sword fighting, with the different type of sword that each of them uses and how it represents the culture of their tribe that little bit more. I don't think they're going to end up in the top 10, unfortunately. And I think if they'd come back for the invasion and we'd seen more of them in action, and like we'd got like a sequence of like the two of them working together to take out Fire Nation soldiers during the invasion, maybe we'd then be considering them as like kind of weapon experts. But as it is right now, I don't really think there's enough to warrant the spot on the list. So yeah, we're going to get rid of Ganjin leader and Zhang leader. And that, how many does that leave us with? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So we have 15 characters left. So we've got rid of like roughly half of the list. I feel like Seifel might have to go just on the basis of we don't see him fight enough, but he's clearly a pretty skilled swordsman. I think definitely of the characters we have left, I'm kind of thinking like Seifel, Vashir maybe. Yeah, it gets tough at this point because it's probably like Seifel, Chi Blocker, Vashir maybe. Gilak, of course, I think probably goes at this point. I actually think Gilak is probably the one who goes next, in that Hakoda in the first fight in North and South completely outclasses him. And Gilak only gets the advantage later on when Hakoda's injured after Gilak sort of betrays the handshake and stabs him. Gilak, I think, goes at this point. He doesn't stand out that much, honestly. As a fighter, I do think the Chi Blocker kids almost stand out more than Gilak. His leadership is kind of more of the focus of the character, I think. And again, we have Hakoda here to be our sort of like Water Tribe kind of leader character, and I don't think both are going to make the list. So I think Gilak's going to go. That leaves I think Seifel probably goes, just on the basis of, he kills some Dao Fei guards and like cuts Jianju, but he was killed ultimately. So just on the basis of we don't know enough, we'll get rid of Seifel. Again, we've still got Piandao, Sokka, like Jet as our swordsman characters left. So that leaves us with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So at this point, we probably need to sort of clarify the characters we're thinking of more towards the top of the list. I think Piandao, Ty Lee, Suki are definitely like top tier. But yeah, we probably need to get rid of some of these guys. So yeah, I think Battle of the Archers is probably the next one. So this is where we get into the idea of the archers who come after Aang come across like amazingly well. Admittedly, Aang is in complete airbender mode, where he's avoiding and evading, and he's not really trying to go against them, and they are in a way perfect to, you know, combat Aang in that moment. Bashir obviously is made a little bit of a joke of, because the rough rhinos, they always tonally are a bit weird with, where they are the core of the tragedy in Jet's story, but any character who comes across them, whether it's Iroh and Zuko or Team Avatar, always, you know, goes over them. They are jobbed out relentlessly as fighters, and even Bashir is made fun of a little bit here. Now, admittedly, it's the team that is mainly non-bender fighters, with Colonel Monkey, who's maybe a top 25 firebender, like at most. They're not super high up there. And so the question really here is, you know, the Yuan archers are not meant to be viewed as like as amazingly high as they are when they take out Aang, but not as low as Bashir is presented. And then Longshot, I think, is meant to be our sort of Legolas of the Avatar world. So I feel perfectly fine with sort of saying that in terms of the sort of eagle eye will realistically never miss his shot, Longshot is probably that guy. That's the way he's kind of presented. But he is very much an archer. He's a support character more so than a full-on fighter. I think in the previous list that I did, I gave him the 10 slot, just so like we had an archer and we weren't just immediately kind of just saying, well, what's an archer meant to do against other characters? So it's definitely a tough one when it comes to that, and that, you know, from a distance, you know, some of these other close range fighters do have to deal with an archer, and they're both super skilled. And this is where we get into this thing with non-bender fighters, especially the ones who have bladed weapons or weapons that are aiming to sort of pierce people. We're never going to see them connect properly, and so the characters who are meant to like hit every shot have to miss their shots because the characters can't get injured, even though realistically Longshot is meant to be viewed as, you know, like I said, basically Avatar Legolas, who like never misses a shot and can like hang from a tree upside down and do this, and the Yuan archer is roughly the same. It's one of those things where like archery is a valuable skill, and it's not that like the characters are just stuck in one spot forever. They can move, like Longshot can move around in the trees like the other freedom fighters. We saw what the Yuan archers were able to do in terms of coming down the mountain after Aang. So they're still agile to a degree. The problem is, of course, that it's hard to argue for up close. I'd give it to Longshot over Bashir, because I think Bashir has that moment in the Rift where Sokka just gets to absolutely demolish him up close, and he literally says to him, "You're an archer, so you're not good up close," and then he just flips him over and slams him into the ground, even though Bashir's like, "But I have training," and Sokka gets to really just demolish Bashir. So we don't see that happen to Longshot. Longshot doesn't get treated like that in a way. So I'm definitely giving it, the edge to Longshot over Bashir. So we can get rid of Bashir. Okay, so June is gone. Let's see. They're probably characters who are making the top 10. That's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 2 need to go from who we have left. And I don't think any of these characters are going to go just yet. Yeah, the pirates, yeah, mentioned in chat there. They're cool and all, but I don't really see how they stand out that much. You know, they fight in smoke and they get to, you know, have the brawls, but I don't know. So yeah, I think Jet's gonna make the top 10 for sure. This is the thing with Tokuga. Like, do we rate Tokuga, or is Tokuga just like a poor man's Jet? Like, I think they try really hard in the writing to make you like Tokuga. That Tokuga is cool guy. He's Mr. Cool. He is Legend of Korra Poochie. He's the character who they want you to really get behind and like, because he's got all the skills you'd really want. And it just feels like, okay, he's not a great character, but like he's got the skills that you probably want, and I think you have to give him that, and he probably makes the list somewhere. But it's a really weird one, because again, a lot of his fights are like post spirit morphing, and we're not considering spirit morphing, but he still gets to do pretty well on his own and kind of change the dynamic. So yeah, chi blocker. I think we've got chi blockers here. Tokuga's a chi blocker. Suki's a chi blocker. Ty Lee's a chi blocker. We're going to cover characters who have chi blocking and represent it really, really, really well. I don't think chi blocking like straight away means like every character who has it needs to make the list. So yeah, they end up, I think, being sort of just outside the top 10 because you know, a bunch of chi blockers, they really do challenge a lot of the benders that we see early on in Korra. Now, obviously later on, they sort of figure out the style, and that, you know, you need to have a quicker bending style. The pro bending style is more suited to facing off against the chi blockers, and they're not as strong. But still, as generic kind of characters, they stand out quite well. They kind of feel like your non-bender Dai Li agents style thing, and so they'll get the credit for that, but they're going to go at this point. And I think that leaves us with 11 characters left. So now we have, this is the tough one, because you know, who's coming towards the end. So yeah, we agree Tokuga's on the list, definitely. Chi blocker is gone. At this point, the weakest characters I feel are it probably is Longshot, just because he's overly specialized as an archer, and then maybe May, perhaps at this point. This is where we get interesting, because again, May is also more of a long range fighter, in that she doesn't use archery, but she effectively uses kind of, you know, blade launchers and throwing knives and stuff like that. And obviously she's skilled. She's a member of Ozai's Angels for a reason, in that Azula values her enough to be on the team. But of the team, I think, you know, it's clear that she is the kind of weakest of the group there. And it's a really difficult one, in that she gets some really cool moments to shine, definitely. But I think a lot of the characters on the list stand out a little bit more than her. And again, I think she does suffer perhaps because they can never show her to actually hit someone really with her knives, and so she has to like pin them up against walls and stuff like that. It's an interesting one. And it's because like there's a lot of characters here who just you value like up close are just going to be really really valuable, very skilled. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but is it long shot that unfortunately is the unlucky 11? Um, that's where I kind of lean at this point, just because we've seen May, I think, be more of a mid range, and mid range I think is slightly less specialized than being more long range like long shot. Again, this is where we're going to get into I think a lot of situations where we're going to have characters here who you would value quite highly if you were forming a team of characters. You would definitely want your archer, and you'd probably choose Longshot as your archer. Um, but in terms of being able to hold their own in a one-on-one fight against a lot of the other characters, an archer, you know, if they miss their first couple of shots and someone gets in close, it feels like it's kind of over for them. So yeah, it seems like the rough agreement is this, and I think that's fine. There's, that's where we are. Just the archers, just about missing out, but clearly the best archer in the series for sure, and a very cool character. Hope we get to see more of him in future comics and stuff like that. The one of the greatest ships in the show, Smeller Shot. Hopefully we get there in the end. Those two, but unfortunately, yeah, the number 11 is always there. I did my best long shot, but he falls off at this point. So that leaves us with our 10. So we have Asami, the Lieutenant, Tokuga, Jet, Hakoda, Sokka, Suki, Piandao, and Mei. So this is where we're going to get into, okay, weakest characters right now, I think we're probably looking at, Mei. I think this is where we need to get into a bit of a discussion on Hakoda. I've seen a few people mention Hakoda here at some point. I have Hakoda more middle of the road, middle of the list. Not quite making the absolute upper tiers, but I don't have him right down here at like 9-10. Just because like he obviously has some elements of like Sokka's style in terms of like being the brawler, being intelligent, being a really strong leader, and we've seen him demonstrate just a nice mix, I think, of being reasonably agile for kind of a big man and also having like good strength. Just representative of just being a skilled Water Tribe warrior. What probably holds him back a little bit is that he's presented really well in a lot of his fights, but there's nothing overly distinct about him. But how solid he is, I think, means he's above a few of these characters here who are maybe more specialized, but are maybe kind of one-trick ponies type thing. So it's an interesting one in that, look, Gilak was there and thereabouts. He's probably a top 15 character, and he really outclassed Gilak. He did take out a few Fire Nation guards, as we saw, and especially in the flashback of when Kaya was killed, you really see him just throwing Fire Nation people around. Like, he's having a conversation with Sokka while he's tossing someone into a wall. Like, he's aware of what's going on the battlefield, but he's still focused on other stuff as well. And it just speaks to, like, yeah, he's there and thereabouts, I think. So I wouldn't really be advocating Hakoda for being like this low down. So what are people saying here? Jet versus Hakoda. I would definitely say Jet above Hakoda. I think Jet is one of the like premier swordsmen in the series. And I think, the combination of agility, sword skills against good opponents, he has like more specific one-on-one fights. I'd be definitely like Jet, I think, above Hakoda for sure. I think Jet rates quite highly in my opinion, at least. So I think it is Mei, because again, Tokuga has, you'd say at least, decent sword skills. He has decent chi blocking, and is apparently a decent leader. We can criticize the writing of the character, I suppose, a little bit, but he's given these traits for sure. So Tokuga is, I think, a more complete fighter than Mei, but Mei is still pretty good. But I think she kind of has to be 10 at this point. Who else are we talking about here? I think Sokka's a little bit higher up here. I don't think Sokka's like super low down, but I also don't think Sokka's going to be necessarily fighting for like the absolute top ranks. So there's that. The lieutenant is kind of a weird one in that he's super skilled, but he ultimately loses most of his fights. Again, this is sort of the chi blockers in general, the equalists in Korra. They get to be very strong early on, but then once the characters kind of get used to fighting them, it's the lieutenant near-death experience number 1, falling off a cliff number 2, smacked by Naga number 3, and like falling off the roof of the pro bending arena. Like, he has a bunch of near-death experiences where he holds his own really well against characters, but never quite gets the victory. But the skill is there. Like, he's agile. The Kali sticks are pretty valuable, but I think we're considering Asami above him. This is where, like, okay, I think at this point it probably is Mei or the lieutenant down here, because are there many characters I would rate the lieutenant above? No, probably not Tokuga. No. Yeah, like, I think this is the question, I think, here for where we are at this point is Mei or the lieutenant for the number 10 slot. That's, I think, what it comes down to. I like Mei as a character. I do like that her fighting style ends up being unique, but the lieutenant is also unique in his own way. They're both relatively dynamic, I think. The lieutenant probably gets slightly more high profile fights than Mei does. There seems to be definitely a bit of a mix here. Some people saying Mei, some people saying the lieutenant. The way I had it on my list was, I think I had Mei below the lieutenant initially, but I kind of want to give her the credit. I'll just put this in like this for now. We'll come back to that if we need that. Again, we're just trying to create some of the list here, so we actually begin to fill it in. We can come back and maybe change this if we need to. So we've roughly decided they're going to be there and thereabouts, but they might switch. So we're kind of done with them for now. Okay. Next up, I don't know. Okay. Who are people considering to be number 1? That's what I really want to know. Because I think it's going to get really awkward about like trying to place 8 next before we maybe fill in some of the top slots. I think we need to just clear out a few people who we know are going to be top. To me, I'm thinking the contenders for the top 3 are, to me, it's either Piandao, Suki, or Ty Lee. They're the top 3, and I don't really think there's much of a question about other characters breaking into that. They are the 3 elite characters at the top for me. Okay, there's a lot of Ty Lee like here, but there's also a few Piandaos. Okay. So Ty Lee, Suki, Ty Lee, Piandao, Suki. Yeah, that's pretty much what people agree with. Okay, so that means, okay, we know that Ty Lee, Suki, and Piandao are going to be considered top 3. So just below them, then, number 4 is an interesting spot where the way I have it is more like this, like 4, 5, 6 to me is sort of like Jet. It's Jet, Sokka, Hakoda, Asami kind of territory. Now I know that's a lot of characters I just named there. In that, like, I'm thinking Tokuga is more down here, and like Sokka is obviously going to be very interesting to place. So I think Asami is one where we might have to discuss here, because I don't quite see Asami as being 4, because part of this is just that I don't think we get to see Asami shine against anyone particularly like incredible, and she ends up being just kind of left out of a lot of the big fights, and she obviously, you know, pretty much gets to dominate anytime she's thrown in there against groups of non-benders and so on, and she is really impressive and skilled, and like she has the acrobatics. The shock glove is a great weapon, but I don't see Asami being like that much higher than the lieutenant. It is kind of my logic in that I think ultimately those characters are very on par with where they're at, and that they're both agile. They both have a weapon that ultimately shocks to get the victory, and it's just a matter of, I suppose, presentation wise, like the lieutenant loses most of his fights, Asami wins most of her fights, but if you change the positioning of those characters, I think the results would still roughly be the same. Her beating the lieutenant is kind of like, surprise, I've switched sides, take you by surprise. There's only so much I think you can value that in terms of like, she's just clearly better than him. Like, I will definitely say Asami above the lieutenant. I'm not arguing the other way around. But I think it's relatively close. So there's that. So that's an interesting one. So we might actually end up having to do number 8 first. So I'm thinking at this point it's Asami or Tokuga here. So I guess the question is like, do we agree that basically like, okay, Asami, Jet, Hakoda, Sokka, Tsukitali, that they're all ahead of Tokuga? Or are we going to make an argument for like Tokuga maybe being better than, I suppose of the people that we haven't placed yet, is Tokuga above any of them? That's the kind of question I have. Tokuga at 8, okay. Tokuga over Jet and Hakoda. I think the thing with Tokuga, like I said, is that like he has all the skill sets you kind of want as a non-bender, but I don't necessarily view him as being as skilled of a swordsman as Jet is. In the sense like I think that's kind of undervaluing Jet a little bit, that Jet pushes Aang, and like typically it is tough for non-benders to challenge the kind of elite benders like that well. And again, like Jet with the hook swords, he has kind of an advantage in the trees, but again it's against an airbender who you would say does well in the trees as well. Zuko, like if we were considering Zuko with swords, I think we'd be placing him relatively highly. So I definitely think Jet is more up here, like 4 or 5, I think. Yeah. So yeah, there's definitely a little bit of a thing in chat between like, okay, basically is like Asami more along the lines of up being 4 or 5, or is Asami more 7, 8? and it really depends on just how much you value how skilled she is. But who do we have left? So Hakoda, I suppose, is an interesting one. I think it is tough. This is where it gets tough for Hakoda to kind of justify, like, in what way is Hakoda defeating a lot of these other characters, in terms of like Hakoda versus Tokuga. I think it's not necessarily a thing where like Tokuga is just immediately going to be able to like chi block Hakoda and get the advantage, because Hakoda has good, technical skill as well, as we saw against Gilak. He really disarms Gilak rather than like out-strengthening him or something like that. So that's an interesting one. And then like hook swords versus this is weird. This is where there's a lot of challenging stuff. So what way am I doing this? So okay, Sami, yeah, we're struggling with Sami. We're struggling with Tokuga. Tokuga, Hakoda. Yeah. Let me just put this down, just so we're not stuck here forever. Tokuga, Hakoda. How does that look? And that would leave then. Let's just say, okay, I think we're pretty locked in that like Tokuga's probably not going to go higher than 7. I think some people said like maybe he's 6 or there and thereabouts, but I think there's an agreement that he's roughly around this point. So there's that. So if we just say we've roughly dealt with them, where does that leave us? Given that again, Suki, Tylee, and Piandao are we've pretty much agreed they're going to be in the top 3 in a specific order. Okay, that leaves Sokka, Jet, Asami for these spots. Sokka, in some sort of an order here. 4, 5, 6. Jet, Sokka, Asami in some sort of an order. This is an interesting one. And then I think someone mentioned, Sokka versus Hakoda. To give Sokka the credit, you have to acknowledge that he has had the most growth out of any character, from sort of starting out as not being a very good fighter to being pretty skilled by the end of the series. And he's only going to get better as time goes on. Like, if you look at him in the comics, he is extremely capable as a non-bender fighter. He knows how to handle benders. Like, he holds off Azula on the roof of Ursa's house, basically, and doesn't get himself absolutely annihilated. I think there's some impressive feats from Sokka, and it's just a combination of like, yes, Sokka is not the most technical character. There's a reason we're ultimately not considering him, I think, really for the top 3 or even the top 4 perhaps. Is that on a technical level he doesn't stand out as much, but his intelligence combined with decent skill and his kind of clever tactics, I think, put him there and thereabouts. I am very inclined to be like, Jet kind of feels like locked in here. Not Jets, just Jet. And then it's Asami, Sokka, 5, 6, fighting for 5 and 6. The reason I say that is because, to me, Jet is definitely one of the best swordsmen outside of Piandao. In that, I think Zuko is probably like a little bit better than Jet if we were considering Zuko for the list, and then Piandao is definitely our best swordsman. Just Jet is agile, he's aggressive, but it's not to a disadvantage. I think he just is very technical and skilled, and I just really struggle with the idea that I definitely think Jet wouldn't be drawn in particularly by a lot of Sokka's tactics, just because like I think Sokka needs more of a sort of distraction to be able to defeat Jet. I don't think he's quite at the level where, you would consider, in the same way that like Sokka can't really defeat Piandao by using better sort of like intelligence and tactics to beat, better technicality. I think it's closer between Jet and Sokka, but I ultimately think, Jet is just very, very focused. And again, like this gets into the situation of us, like Sokka deserves credit, but like not too much credit in a way. It's really tough to know exactly where to place it. So that's why I feel pretty confident about Jet being where he is, and that the thing with Asami is like it's really tough to know how a fight between sort of a swordsman character and Asami would go, because on one hand you're like, well, if she touches the swordsman with her glove, she wins, but it's like if the swordsman touches Asami with the sword, they win. It's very much a case of who would get the first strike in, and then again, depending on the environment, like Jet's probably going to have a mobility advantage because he's able to swing around a little bit more. So there's that. And then Jet is like, he was able to dodge Aang pretty well. Asami knows more martial arts than Sokka, and she has more strength. That's one of those ones where like we don't technically know that. Asami was thought self-defense. It's like a bit, it's a bit general, and then Sokka just knows some form of hand-to-hand combat. I wouldn't necessarily say either is like a mixed martial arts like master necessarily. So that's kind of one of those kind of things. Like, sure, maybe Asami's style is a little bit more modern, and Sokka's is more of a just like kind of warrior style to kind of go hand to hand when you're not using some sort of a weapon. But the thing is, like, Sokka with a sword is still decent. This is where it gets so tricky, because Asami's really intelligent too. But the way her fights tend to go is that she doesn't defeat her opponents by like her intelligence. She kind of tends to just do the same move sort of in most of her fights. Like if you watch her fights over and over again, you kind of see that she does sort of the same sort of moves, which is sort of like she kind of blocks a punch and sort of like spins in and then just uses the shock glove to finish it off. There's so many fights where she does some sort of a move like that, and that's fine against generic Earth Empire Guard, generic chi blocker, but it's just the lack of a fight against someone I think really stand out, because this is the thing where like everyone gets a chance to stand out against generic guards. May does. Tokuga gets to take out a bunch of triad members and so on. And yeah, I definitely think you would say that is that Asami is more acrobatic, sort of agile than Sokka. Sokka standout victories. In terms of one-on-one fights, I suppose that's the interesting thing with Sokka. Because like he obviously he tends to take the role of sort of the non-bender support in a lot of the fights. He has victories over, say, like I think at some point he defeats like at least 2 or 3 members of the Rough Rhinos one-on-one. He gets advantages over them, and they were obviously there in the shortlist at some point. He defeats Vashir one-on-one. I think Yalu, he ends up taking Yalu out basically on his own at one point. Then you have the stuff like, okay, Boomerang takes people out. But then you also have to remember, he was quite impressive in the Sozin's Comet attack on the blimps. Um, Even if some of his moves at the end were sort of desperation, those were still fights that he technically won. At the end, defeating Sozin's Comet enhanced firebenders as sort of a last ditch kind of type thing. Again, I wouldn't read too much into like the whole hopping from blimp to blimp stuff, but he does defeat some Sozin's Comet kind of people. And look again, he needs Suki's help, but before Suki arrived, he still took out the two guards on kind of either side of him. It's just more people came in. It's still like I think a noted thing for Sokka that he defeats a Sozin's Comet enhanced firebender. So and yeah, it feels harsh to say it like that, but I kind of can't help but like I can't really disagree with it. Just the point there of like Asami has literally only one technique for combat. And that like it's kind of true. Like she is just generally good and then tends to do one main move to shock people. It's unfortunate, but I kind of feel that's kind of a little bit true. Yeah, like obviously it's a tad harsh in that like she obviously has other techniques, but watch her fight. She does tend to do that same move a lot. Um, so it's one of those things where like I don't think Asami ends up taking out or being involved in a fight with anyone that substantial. Like, what is Asami's most substantial victory, I suppose, to anyone in the chat sort of that really wants to make the argument for Asami here? Like, hmm, hmm. Because I definitely, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking like Sokka and the people he goes up against, and even if he doesn't win every fight, he doesn't lose to everyone he fights either. Um, in that like he's gone up against Azula at times. Hmm. The only thing I'd say about the Thugs is that like it's a completely generic bandit group that again it's impressive, but Sokka holds his own against Azula on top of the roof. Sokka defeats multiple members of the Rough Rhinos. Uh, it's that sort of thing. Um, it's really tricky. I think it's just impossible. Hmm. We don't see the fight though, but the result is still that he survives against an opponent who should be like 20 levels above him. Is I think more of the point that that's him going up against a top three firebender. Um, there's that. Hmm. Hmm. Sokka also isn't as durable as Asami. Those are the sort of points where, like, I think that's kind of borderline impossible to really prove. Um, Again, because Asami is kind of a little bit of a protected character where she doesn't often lose fights, and yes, it's a point in her favor that she doesn't lose fights. But again, this is where you have to realize, like, the character is written in a certain way. They're booked well. Uh, as they're written, in that like Tokuga gets all the advantages in the way he is written, but we all sort of agree he's not quite up there and thereabouts. So that's sort of the problem. There is just like, you know, hmm, yeah, like yeah, Sammy we don't really see in a long term fight. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, this is a really tough one because we're talking about Asami individually, Sokka individually, but um, in the end, like it's going to be a kind of it's borderline impossible to kind of really consider of like if they actually go up against each other. Like he has the boomerang for distance, which she's agile enough to dodge. They come in close, and he has, of course, the sword to fight against her with, um, and that obviously means she can't be as aggressive as she is against the people she's supremely confident with taking out. Um, so there's that. I think probably the thing that probably works against Sokka is actually just that because in the comics he doesn't have his sword, we don't get to see him with his weapon that sort of wins him all of his fights. I think, like he's good with the club as we see, and he's still able to get some decent victories. But it's a it's a really tough one. But I also feel like I really don't want to undervalue Sokka with the sword, and I don't know necessarily how much of a defense Asami has against the against that. Because and this is where we get into the issue here of just like the character can do the same thing she did in a separate fight in this new fight. You can make that case like either way for either character, in that you can say, well, what if she just gets hit in the head with the boomerang at the start, but that's not obviously not going to happen. Is Sokka just immediately going to accept getting uh, the sword kicked out of his hand? And it just gets really tough at that point. And the one I suppose slight disagreement I just have is that we have more evidence of it for Sokka being in a like prolonged fight than we do of Asami. Not that means Asami can't do anything after the first little bit, but we also don't do that. And then so Sokka also has no experience against the new tech. But then as far as we're aware, like, we don't necessarily know how Asami would do up against a kind of, really, really skilled swordsman. It's really difficult. That might actually end up being the tougher one. Let's see there. With Asami's weapon, there won't be a prolonged fight. Again, you can make the argument the other way. Like with Sokka's weapon, there won't be a prolonged fight. Like, what's to say who gets the first hit and stuff like that? Again, like one decent cut, one decent shock, the fight's over either way, pretty much. We don't know exactly what way that goes, but obviously the show is more willing to show someone getting shocked than they are willing to show someone getting cut. So, it's hard to overly make the case for the swordsman and stuff like that. Sokka's good with the sword, but he's not that good. Well, that good, like, what do you mean? Like, good enough to defeat Asami good, or what? Sure, compared to other swordsmen, he's not as strong. In terms of, like, you'd say Pianda and Zuko are above him, like, we know that. But again, Asami is not going up against Sokka with a sword. And, like, again, he has the reach advantage because of that, because he's using a weapon with length to it, and she's using a shock glove that she has to directly touch him with. It's pretty difficult. I think we'll come back to this one because it might be difficult to do this. So we get to the top three. So it's like we said, Piandao, Ty Lee, and Suki. But what is the order? We'll come back to I suppose Piandao. I think Ty Lee and Suki is kind of interesting because they're quite similar in many ways. So the thing we need to consider here is that as of right now, they are both Kyoshi warriors and both have experience with each other's techniques. So Ty Lee and Suki both know chi blocking. So that's important to note. They're both obviously extremely agile. They both, I suppose you would say in terms of their battle gear, are probably going to go in wearing Kyoshi warrior armor. So Ty Lee is now better than she was in ATLA, where you would say she was maybe a little bit vulnerable on the defense side of things, but now she's wearing armor. Plus, even though I don't think we ever see Ty Lee use a lot of her Kyoshi warrior sort of equipment and weaponry, I think she holds her fan at some point, but I don't think we ever really see her fight with them. She still would have a tendency to lean towards her chi blocking, but she has the other equipment there to use if needed. Whereas Suki is more of, she has the weapon skill. She'll use the katana, she'll use the sword, she'll use the fans, and she also has chi blocking now as well. So the thing is here, like, they're both like really, really close because they've both effectively thought each other, in that Ty Lee's clearly thought Suki the chi blocking, and then Suki, as the leader of the Kyoshi warriors, has probably taught Ty Lee some of the skills associated with being a Kyoshi warrior. It's just that we've probably seen more of Suki utilizing the extra skills that she's learned versus the other way around. Yeah, Ty Lee's more flexible and agile. Suki's weapon focus. Can't say who's better. This is an interesting one because yes, Ty Lee's more flexible and agile, but I don't think there's really a character who comes as close to the same agility as Ty Lee as Suki. Because you have to remember, like, what Suki did to take out the Warden was super, super agile, and we need to be careful to not just immediately say, like, Ty Lee's more agile than like everyone just because she's like got circus training and stuff like that, because otherwise then we're sort of saying, well, Kirima is the most agile character in like the franchise because she does some crazy kind of bending thing that we don't even see Ty Lee do, and that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's that. And yeah, like, and then you get into the idea of, like, yeah, Suki is the leadership character over Ty Lee. And yeah, this is so interesting in that you can make cases either way, in that, yeah, when they kind of had their match on top of the gondola, they were even, and that was, I suppose, a fight that should have been more Ty Lee's fight, because Suki didn't have her equipment with her, but it was even. So it's so tough. This really is pretty much about the slight edge that you would give to Ty Lee with regards to, she's a better chi blocker because she's sort of established to be the master chi blocker that we've seen, and maybe slightly agility, versus Suki's better mastery with other weaponry. Because we have to keep in mind that chi blocking is going to be somewhat diminished in a battle between the two because they're both wearing armor. Now, we know that the armor necessarily isn't a complete guard against chi blocking as such, in that, like, it was a plot point in North and South that, like, Sokka sort of invented, in a way, the first armor that makes you sort of like immune to chi blocking, but still, it's still armor. And then the question, do you think the armor might weigh Ty Lee down? I think a slight bit, but it's a case where Ty Lee would, I think, accept the defensive advantage that she gets, and the like 2-3% like loss in what she's able to do, she's more than able to compensate for that. It's much more of a benefit for her to have the armor and stuff like that, in terms of, like, she takes a slight blow from a weapon, she keeps going with the armor, whereas it might be more of an injury without it. Um, hmm. Yeah, and this is, yeah, where we get into a lot of this stuff of like, hmm, because like Tylee is obviously, I think, almost like presented as like the premier non-bender character because she's the one who directly gets to demonstrate chi blocking on like some of the main cast and so on. Um, but like I said, like you really have to consider in this case that both characters have grown and advanced from a lot of those early ATLA experiences and stuff like that. Um, hmm. So I don't know. It seems like this is a dead heat. So the question here now is then, Pian Dao, are we leaning towards basically being 1 or 3? Because I struggle with the idea that like we somehow find a gap between Suki and Tylee. I think that kind of is very difficult to explain how like these two characters, Suki and Tylee, who we're reviewing like right next to each other, are someone's in between them. So I think Piandao has to either be 1 or 3. Suki or Tylee, just Piandao number 1. Yeah, like I think when I did the list a few years ago, I went Piandao number 1. But I think the problem with Piandao is, like we've encountered a lot of the times doing this list, is that he is a character where he is the reputation. When we see him fight against Sokka, and then there's like a 5-second sequence in Sozin's Comet, and then I suppose just the fact that he sort of survives Sozin's Comet type thing. He has the legend behind him as the main non-bender in the Order of the White Lotus, the master swordsman above all swordsmen in the series, who trained both Sokka and Zuko, which is quite valuable. And then Order of White Lotus means like he doesn't just have your typical Fire Nation attitude. So he's, got a good temperament in a fight as well. Not to mention, of course, it's more of a training fight, even though he does his best to sort of act like he's actually angry. And then, even though Piandao says it to Sokka that, like, you're younger, you have this sort of, like, agility advantage, Piandao can still move. This is one where, like, I don't really feel like we have to overly, like, make the appeal for Piandao too much of just, like, he's too old, we need to, like, de-age him a little bit. Like, he can still go in that, like, he slides down the Paku water slide very easily and takes out those Fire Nation guards that he does in the Comet. He still has the agility, even if he's not like the be all end all. This is the same sort of situation as Boomy, where, like, sure, probably Boomy in his 30s is a little bit more agile than he is now, but you value him more as he is now with the experience and stuff like that. And again, this gets into the point that we were kind of almost making before, of like the Master Swordsman against a character who's going to face him hand to hand in Tylee primarily. And then Suki, who can do both. Suki can go hand to hand, or she has her sword, she has her shield, or the fans can be a defense because they're metal as well. So it's so difficult to frame it in that, like, Suki and Tylee, on the basis of what we see, would be ahead of Piandao, but the legend and legacy of the character of Piandao, we are clearly meant to view him as being the master above those two. And then I think trying to account for, like, Suki and Tylee in their primes of, like, being like a couple of years older, it's kind of difficult to know, like, what does that do for them. The strength advantage, which again we haven't really even been considering here, because, like I said towards the start, characters just with raw strength don't tend to place too well. You don't tend to value it too much because it's really not going to come into play in battles of pure technical skills. So it's kind of an interesting one. Weapons, fans, chi blocking. Yeah, like this ultimately gets into the idea of like the master of sword fighting against a characters who can use a lot of different weapons and sort of gadgets almost reasonably well. And this gets into the idea of like Suki always has her sword with her when she has her Kyoshi warrior outfit on. How many times has she used that sword? Like once? Twice? Has she done anything with it? It's really difficult because we've never got a sense for like how skilled of a swordswoman Suki is, or like if Ty Lee necessarily even uses it at all. So it's a weird one in that like Suki trying to face Piandao in a sword fight is not going to go in Suki's way. If she goes at him with the fans, it's like, okay, those fans can act as sort of like reach extensions, I suppose, kind of for doing kind of chi blocking style stuff. But you feel he can dodge it with the sword. He can block that stuff with the sword. The shield is good to add onto her armor, but he's a master swordsman. He's going to be able to go on the offensive. This is really the battle about like Suki is an extremely skilled fighter, but Piandao is like the master. Do you say Suki can beat him just because she kind of has like the kind of Batman jack of all trades, has a bunch of different weapons going on, or is it actually better to be the master of one form? And because this gets into the idea of like a bit of a Star Wars analogy here. It's like Mace Windu to Obi-Wan Kenobi. Who is the most suited to defeat General Grievous? It's Obi-Wan, not because he's the best sword fighter or anything like that, but no, he has the style to defeat Grievous, and because he is the master of that style, that defensive style. And it's just so tricky, because again, it's this situation of like, okay, there's much more going on with Suki and Ty Lee than there is with Piandao. Because with Piandao, it's pretty simple. He's reasonably agile, super experienced, and is just a pure master of the sword. What is Suki doing to get the advantage over the master of the sword? And you'd have to say Suki is not masterful enough with any particular combination of her skills, I think, to defeat Piandao. It's tricky though, because again, like I said, like the sword doesn't get used too much. The agility advantage. I agree. Like Suki has the agility advantage over Piandao, but we saw that he's able to counter someone who has better speed than him. Because we don't want this to just be sort of like the quickest character is the best, which I think was kind of the way it was. Some things were tending to go, is just that like agility wins. So Ty Lee's the most agile, so she's number one. It's really tricky. So it's actually going on quite long, so we have to make some decisions here at some point soon. I suppose so let's see, who's saying Piandao number one, I suppose is the question. Because that, I think, ultimately is the way I'm going to lean as well. Um, hmm. Piando. Yeah, I think most people. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think there's a few people there going Piando 3, but most people I think are going Piando 1, and it's the way I'm gonna lean. If we aren't separating Suki and Ty Lee Piando 3, um, I think I just struggle with the idea that we can create a spot in between those two characters with how close they are. Um, so I think, unfortunately, just on the voting, I think we have to go with this Piandao, and then our two tough battles of Suki Tai Lee and then Asami Sokka next. Um, hmm. Which is going to be easier to break? I think Suki Tai Lee is probably actually harder. So I think we had a lot of the Sokka Asami discussion. Um, I think I was leaning initially Sokka ahead of Asami. The working a little bit, I suppose, against Sokka. I think the thing is, if in terms of just one on one, he isn't the strongest character that we have, but I think he has a high potential in that if we ever saw content with Sokka when he gets the swords back and he's really strong, I'd be very, very inclined to go just a little bit above. But I think just on his own, I kind of do worry that without being able to sort of lead the battle on his own, or having backup, or just being part of a team, Asami does sort of stand out because she does, what she does on her own. Yes, she's involved in sort of team battles, but they very much portray her as she goes over there and takes out those 2-3 guards, takes out those 2-3 soldiers. And it's unfortunate because I think it comes down to the fact that, like, Asami's presented better, and even though Sokka, like, theoretically has, like, a lot going in his favor, the technical advantage probably has to go roughly to Asami. So I think I'm going to say this here. And it's opposite of what I had on my list here. I actually had Asami further down. But I'll give it to her here just because she is presented pretty strongly. But this is a case where I very much would want to see Asami do more fights, like get to see her in a more protracted fight. And we also acknowledge that, like, Sokka, I think, has a lot of potential, because, like, look at the guy in the Old Friends poster and tell me he's not some amazing non-bender fighter when he's a bit older. It's just difficult to properly, I think, imagine where that quite gets to. And I think the thing that the factor here probably is just Asami really has the agility advantage there, and just seems a little bit more technical than Sokka. The way I'd say it is that, like, if I was to make a team of benders, I'd choose Sokka probably above Asami, like, every day of the week. But if we're doing a one-on-one fight scenario, it probably is Asami over Sokka. Yeah. And then, yeah, last but not least, yeah, I think we need to see a Asami fight that lasts longer than 3 seconds before we overhype her. I agree. I do agree. And over the course of this, like, I definitely, I feel I've given Sokka a lot of credit. I've had my time of, like, these are the negatives of Asami, these are the negatives of Sokka. And I think it is unfortunate that just Asami is placed in a kind of very kind of privileged sort of position, in that, like, she's isn't booked against anyone strong. She hasn't had she hasn't had her world championship match, to use a bit of kind of wrestling terminology. She's had her matches against enhancement talent to big her up pretty well. But how highly do you value that talent that she's gone up against? Where are the names that she's defeated? That would be the only thing that I think works against her. And I think, like we've discussed over a lot of these fights, is that they often do that. They often get across a character is really strong by showing them defeating a bunch of generic guards. And unfortunately, the problem with Asami is just that is nearly all of her fights. And I do agree with that. But it is still the case that she won all of her fights, even if you don't value them that highly. And then the question there, so even the Sokka that fought against the Red Lotus is below Asami. This is this is the problem with regards to, we don't know anything about the details about that fight. In terms of, we don't even know if Sokka survived that fight necessarily. How it went or anything like that. Because otherwise, if we knew the details of that fight, we'd probably have to consider Zahir for the list as well. Because that would have really helped us with probably placing Zuko on the firebending list as well. In terms of, what was that fight? It's Tenzin, Tonraq, Zuko, and Sokka against the Red Lotus members, but Zahir doesn't have his airbending because of the timeline situation. Plus, potentially, there is Ordered White Lotus guards. The timing on that means that there probably wouldn't have been Ordered White Lotus guards because, they only come into play afterwards. So all we know is just that those were the combatants, and the end result is that the Red Lotus members got captured. We don't know who was amazing in that fight, who wasn't amazing in that fight, or anything like that. What the matchups were, that sort of thing. So it's a notable thing that at some point in the future, Sokka is involved in a massive fight, and Sokka could have been the advantage, the big thing there. I'm inclined to lean towards Zuko probably being the most impressive character in that fight, and it's the age getting the better of him in the years since that fight that is probably the determining factor there. But the Sokka is on the basis of right now, and not really knowing where the prime Sokka is, it's kind of hard to place. Sokka is number one in my mind. Again, I like Sokka. I think everyone likes Sokka, but to argue that he's a better fighter than Suki, Ty Lee, Jet, Piandao, who directly defeats him, when Zuko in sword fighting matches is better than him, it is a bit of a problem. Again, if you're valuing Sokka on the basis of as a team leader, as a non-bender who is solid and is going to make your team better, sure, Sokka is the support bender that you want in the background, organizing things, coming up with clever tactics. There's probably no one better in that regards, but the technical fighting side of things is right now, on the basis of what we know, there are characters better than him. So one is very difficult to, I think, justify. I get it, he's the non-bender on Team Avatar. You feel he should be there and thereabouts, but these are decisions we have to make. So last but not least, I'll just put it in here just so we know what we're doing. And then I'll just do this. What is the order between these two? Like I discussed already, they're pretty much even in terms of their skill set and what they have going for them. But as we discussed, the key advantages or disadvantages between them is that Ty Lee probably has a slight agility edge, but Suki's probably arguably the second most agile character in the show. So you can't give it to Ty Lee just on the basis of agility because Suki's there and thereabouts. So there's that. Ty Lee, as far as we've seen, even though she has the Kyoshi Warrior equipment, doesn't really use it much and still tends to go with chi blocking. Which is obviously great because that's her skill set. That's her kind of what she is a master of. Suki is more of the warrior character, where she is much more skilled with the Kyoshi Warrior skill set of just, she has her kind of martial arts up close fighting style, but she also now knows chi blocking and is skilled enough at chi blocking to begin to teach other people chi blocking. So I don't think it's fair to say that Suki is just like a beginner level chi blocker at this point. It seems like enough time has passed to where she is, would technically be considered a master to be able to pass it on so effectively to other people. But you'd still give Ty Lee the edge there. They're both wearing Kyoshi Warrior armor, so in terms of what does that do, that means Ty Lee has a defense against Suki's weaponry, but it also means Suki has a defense against Ty Lee's chi blocking. And like we know, chi blocking still affects non-benders. It just obviously doesn't diminish bending, but it does basically make limbs go numb and stuff like that. So there's that. Ty Lee versus Suki. It's difficult because we've directly seen the two of them fight one-on-one, and it be a tie. That Ty Lee couldn't out-agile Suki and chi block her, and that was with Suki not wearing her armor or having any of her equipment. Suki just hand-to-hand, no chi blocking, was able to block. And now Suki didn't get the advantage either, but it serves as a thing of Suki can defend against Ty Lee's biggest talent. And I think that is kind of notable, and while they've both, I suppose, gone on to improve, the case you'd probably make is just that if this is going to end in hand-to-hand, it probably would be Ty Lee, but we've seen that Suki can block that. The question is, if it then turns into more of a fight with the weapons and, other stuff, Suki then has the advantage because Ty Lee is sort of unknown about how skilled she is with the other weapons and so on. So there's that. I think I looked through the comics and Ty Lee has fans, but they just show her when she's first introduced holding the fan up, not actually utilizing it in combat or anything like that. But that's more of against benders and stuff like that. I think it means that Ty Lee just is going to be able to deal with more benders. She can fight them a little bit more head on, one-on-one, because she can block fire with the shield and stuff like that. If she comes up against someone wearing armor, she has weapons to break down the armor and then do some chi blocking. I don't know. I think this is probably the closest we've sort of ever been. And again, they both have so many impressive feats to their name of as we mentioned in the chat a few times. Ty Lee takes down a lot of the Earth Kingdom soldiers. The kind of Terra Triad Terra team. It's so difficult. I'm inclined to I'm personally inclined to lean slightly, and I mean slightly, as mentioned in the chat there, sort of 51 out of 100 towards Suki. That's kind of the way I'm leaning, just because I think Ty Lee's edge in chi blocking and agility is, I think, met by Suki's just kind of warrior skills, her skills with other weaponry and so on. And I think that can maybe give her the edge, but it's so tough. Because I went with Suki above Ty Lee last time, Um, so it's tough. Hmm. Yeah, I kind of feel like this kind of is the way I feel, at least, but I can see it the other way at the same time. Um, like that's probably one of the closest ones. But I suppose, yeah, in the chat, I suppose, like, just basically one name, Suki or Ty Lee, ahead of who. What are people thinking? That's the way I feel. Okay, so one for Ty Lee, two for two, Suki, Ty Lee. Um, so that's 4-3 so far for Suki, 4-4, 5-4 Ty Lee. Um, there's someone saying it's 50-50. So you can see it's just going back and forth. There's 5-5 Suki. Um, yeah, has there been a closer thing on in the whole all of these lists that we've done? I don't think there has been. Suki, Ty Lee, um, Suki again, and then obviously my vote is Suki just about as well. And again, we have to make a decision. Like, as much as we all want to say 50-50, like, the whole point here is to make a decision and not just have it be a bunch of, like, three-way ties and stuff like that. We're here to make some decisions. And even though it's not the largest set, but it seems like by, like, maybe one or two votes, Suki ahead of Ty Lee slightly, but it's definitely the closest we've seen. So yeah, I think that's the list, and it is a good bit different than the list I had. Like, the top three of the top four are the same. On my list here, I actually had let's see, Piano, Suki, Ty Lee, Jet, Sokka, Hakoda, Asami, the Lieutenant May Longshot. So basically the top four is the same, but the order of the ones down after this is different. So that's kind of interesting. My Longshot didn't get on the list. Tokuga did, but obviously everyone argued quite well for that. Are you 7 and 8 Hakoda Tokuga? I don't know. Look, there's tough decisions, I think, all the way up and down this list. And that, like, look, I can see it where, look, some people are going to really rate Tokuga, some people aren't. I don't think we see him enough. Again, this is Tokuga only considering him before he spirit morphed, because we're not factoring in spiritual enhancement here in the same way that we didn't for, like, Yoon or anything like that. And while he's impressive, again, Jargala wasn't really a character we were looking at too highly for the Earthbender list. The triple threats are not exactly what they once were at that point in the comics, and I don't want to dismiss the fact that the guy is really, really skilled, but you also can't dismiss that, like, Hakoda takes out a bunch of Fire Nation and Firebender guards as well at multiple points in the comics. I don't think Tokuga is the same swordsman with those swords as Jet is, and I don't think his chi blocking is, like, as strong as other characters. So I don't know. It's a tough one. Because if we put Tokuga ahead of this, then I feel we're really undervaluing Hakoda, who is quite strong himself. So I think we're just gonna, like, leave it there and just acknowledge that, look, there were tough decisions up and down the list in terms of Suki Tylee, of course, was hard fought to the end. There was a discussion about Piandao, if he should be 1 or maybe if he should be 3 and these two number 1. Asami Sako was really close as well. Longshot or the Lieutenant, kind of May at the end of the list. You know, there was some tricky ones here, but we got there in the end. So that's the non-bender list, and yeah, that's the all of the bender lists that we've done. So I'm going to just switch this over. So get rid of this, bring up this, and yeah, I think we should be able to go. So yeah, we'll move on to the second kind of topic for the video here, which is just sort of a Avatar Q&A. Like in the chat, what Avatar questions do you want me to cover here? Avatar topics do you want me to cover here? We'll just do like 20-25 minutes or something like that of this, just to finish off the stream, just so it wasn't all about, you know, in-depth non-bender comparisons. So you know, definitely get the questions going in chat. But yeah, that's a strong list, you know. Really, really strong characters. Lots of swordsmen, agile characters, lots of chi blocking, strong leadership as well. That's pretty good. But yeah, good stuff. And then yeah, I will be putting up a video on my channel, basically a kind of summary video of all of the live streams, which basically will just like feature all of the top 10 lists for bending and non-benders, and just some commentary over it, sort of summing up the way the live streams kind of went, what were the tough decisions and that sort of stuff. So there will be a video kind of covering all of this. So okay, first question. What is the best Avatar Funko Pop to date? That's an interesting one. Honestly, like, a lot of them are really nice. I really like the new kind of all elements big airbending Aang, but I do want to see what it looks like in person with the plastic. But honestly, I don't think we can go too wrong with. I think the initial common Aang from the first wave was just really good. Like it's book 1 Aang, has an airbending effect part, nice pose, and the Momo. I think that's pretty good as well. But in general, I think most of the figures are pretty good. So second question: what themes would you like to be treated on the next Avatar series? Okay, themes. Obviously, it depends on where they set it or not. I would like to see more sort of human spirit dynamic, but I think you have to do that in Korra or post Korra, and I wonder exactly how you're going to do that in other ones. So that's obviously one that I always would like to see tackled. Beyond that, like I wouldn't mind like them covering maybe some Earth Kingdom like Dao Fei stuff, just more of that kind of peasant uprising type situation that we had, like in like properly covered in some sort of material on screen. I think now that they introduced that really heavily in the Kyoshi novels, I think the whole just Dao Fei, that system with the Earth Kingdom, what they've kind of moved to resolve with the Earth Kingdom elections in the comics right now has been pretty good. Next question. Which minor characters should get more focus or screen time? Well, I suppose going off like say the list here, like I definitely want to see like Longshot, just some of the other freedom fighters get some spotlight, just because like I've always felt there's meant to be a little bit of shipping stuff going on with like Smellerbee and Longshot, just to see like where they go. Just I suppose that sort of legacy of Jet, like where did those two go? The kind of ideals that he had. Do like if they find out that the Rough Rhinos, Colonel Monkey and the Rough Rhinos, like are responsible for what happened to Jet, what do they do about it? Like those type of things I think would be really, really interesting. But yeah, like there's a lot of characters here who I'd like to see get some spotlight. Like May, I want to see kind of come back into things just so we can deal with the whole Mako Zuko situation. And then like a lot of the main characters from Korra, I'd like to see get more spotlight. You know, the Janora, I definitely would like to see jump more into the spotlight, but it depends on what the story is. What other characters do you want to see get a dedicated episode, like Zuko alone, Korra alone, and Suki alone? I honestly probably would say like a Sammy alone. Something like that, like where she reflects on, I think, learning about Yasuko, her mother. That would be really, really interesting to do in a kind of solo book like that. It depends like where you set it. You could still involve Hiroshi if you set it like at some point in the middle of book 4 or something like that. Just some sort of like a Sammy kind of flashback type thing like that, I think would be quite interesting, just to learn about the other side of her kind of heritage. What is my next Avatar discussion? I have no idea. I don't ever really build up like a backlog of videos, so like at the moment I have no video that I have no videos made that I haven't like uploaded yet. That's just the way I tend to do it. I'm very much like, if I make a video, it gets uploaded, or maybe in some of my bigger videos I hold on to it for like a day or two, but I actually don't know what my next Avatar discussion topic video is going to be. At the moment, it's just one of those times that happens like every so often during the year, where it's like we're just at that kind of worst time of the year waiting for stuff to happen, and nothing has quite happened yet. So I'm very much at that kind of point where like I really want to talk about Avatar, but new Avatar, and then I always kind of lose sight of like these other things that I should focus on, and then inevitably I'll find some topic where maybe there's 2 or 3 discussions that can stem off from it that I could do. So it always kind of comes in like ebbs and flows. I'll have like a week or two where I won't have a clue what to discuss, and then way more video ideas than I know what to do with. So there's that. What do you think about the qualifications of being a master bender? Like the whole "if Zhao is a master, anyone is" thing. Yeah. So we obviously brought this up quite heavily on the Firebender stream, of like Iroh of all characters specifically notes Zhao is a master Firebender. So like what exactly does that mean? The way Zhang talks about Zhao, you'd think that like he didn't pass most of the firebending tests, but clearly Zhao knows how to bend. Just I suppose his approach, philosophy wise, he tends to be overly aggressive, and his main flaw is just that he emphasizes power over control, and his lack of control makes him look amateurish at times in certain situations. But he's still a pretty powerful firebender, more powerful than your standard firebender guard or a lot of the other characters. Like he's meant to be positioned as sort of being sort of like one of like Ozai's best, like admirals, generals type characters. So, I think part of this is just that like we as a fan base have a tendency to be like, oh well, Zhao got defeated by Zuko in episode 3 when Zuko wasn't really that good, so Zhao is nothing. When it's more of the case of like, Iroh's really good, Iroh is now training Zuko, who's beginning to reach his sort of peak. That's where, it came from. But what I will say is that I don't think just being a master bender means all that much. I really don't. Outside of, I think, in airbending, I don't think being a master sort of like waterbender, firebender, earthbender really means all that much, in that like I think most characters that we meet who are of reasonable skill levels are probably masters, in that like say someone like earthbending, like Tyro, Haru's father. Can you really say that he's not a master on the basis of like what he does or does not do? again, maybe we don't see him use as many forms as other characters, but still pretty skilled in his own right, for sure. And then, yeah, I think unless you really have set rules in place for what exactly it is, it's just, do they stand out? There's that. What is the best single display of bending? That's a tough one. Well, obviously you have the enhanced stuff. I always lean with firebending towards Iroh's like one attack to blow through the walls of Ba Sing Se, both because I do think it's just honestly a super powerful fire attack in that the way it goes through the walls, it's not like he keeps a flamethrower on the walls and eventually it bursts through. It's just like, no, it just goes straight through them. And knowing that with the comet, Iroh could have accomplished what his siege didn't in so long. There's so much like behind it from an emotional point of view as well. And it's like a big charged attack. I think it's hard to sort of look past that as being just a really, really impressive feat of bending. But like for earth bending, you probably have like Yoon when he gets serious in the final battle in the Rise of Kyoshi. That has to be right up there as well. Because he literally just controls the ground over a certain area, and he's like destroying the foundations of the mansion in Yokoya, while also making it like dangerous to step on the ground in his range, which is massive. It's really, really impressive. Best airbending feat. It's kind of a tough one. Obviously, all the air nomads the new air nomads working together to make the big tornadoes, pretty cool. But you'd arguably say it maybe is something like just Aang against Boomy, him making the tornado just by running around is kind of cool. So yeah. What else do we have here? Suki series for Avatar Studios. I don't know about that. I think we're going to get something ATLA related, but like I said, I really do think they're going to do the movie just to give us something Avatar and proof that, look, we're not forgetting about this, but that Avatar Studio is about more than just ATLA. I think they definitely need to kind of find that right balance of just not doing anything like has felt like has been the case for the last few years, but also not fully committing to it as well. Let's see, the Cabbage Merchant alone, of course. Where does Katara rank for you in terms of Team Avatar, in terms of favorite characters? Generally, she's at the bottom, but for me, she's top 3. Okay, in terms of main cast, let's see. So Aang is obviously my favorite character. I'd say it's number 2. I'd say it's Aang. Of like the main Team Avatar members, it's probably like Aang, Katara, Zuko. Like, yeah, I'd say that's my top 3 probably with them. It's probably like Aang, Katara, Zuko. So Katara will be number 2 of the kind of main Team Avatar members. Let's see. What else do we have here? Characters like Baatar Senior should have a bit more focus. Yeah, I'd like to know more about Baatar Senior, especially now that Baatar Junior is at home. Like, you know, finish his arc that you sort of set up as well. So there's that. What's your favorite comic art style? I still maintain it's Team Gurihuru. I just love their art. I'd love to see them come back. I'd love to see them do some Korra stuff as well. I always remember they put out that one piece of fan art of Korra and it looked amazing. And I'd love to see how they do the other Korra characters as well. So I definitely would say, like, yeah, Team Gurihuru. Otherwise, I don't think you can go wrong really with, you know, the Runes of the Empire artist either. You know, that art was fantastic, and I don't know like what the situation is with the Korra comics, but I like that as well. Those are probably my 2 favorite art styles. Let's see. When do you think there will be news about new Avatar novels this year? So yeah, this is going to be an interesting one to see, like how correct or not this German publisher was. Or was it German? Or was it Netherlands? I'm not sure. Either way, the international publisher of some of the Avatar books saying that there's going to be new novels next year, meaning that probably that would have to be announced at least later this year. It makes sense. We've had basically, I suppose, a year off for novels. It gives them a time to plan it. Um, it's hard to know when they're going to do the announcements because you don't know, like, is everything now going to be associated with Avatar Studios, or are the comics, the novels, are they still separate to Avatar Studios? But it's clear that things are affected by Avatar Studios all over the place, which is why the Dark Horse comics look like they're on hold for the time being for some reason. So I don't know. Best display of bending is Yukon blood bending the courtroom with his mind. Yeah, like that's definitely up there in terms of just a raw display of power, of just, complete control over an entire room filled with people. It's hard to deny that, and it's those type of feats, which is why you can't argue against the power of psychic bloodbending as being just like the kind of most powerful technique in terms of trying to work around it. Okay, so the question I missed earlier on. Azula redemption arc. Yes, I think yes. I definitely think she deserves a redemption arc. I think a lot of this comes down to like the way you define redemption arc. I think I did a video on like redemption arcs a while ago. I think mainly covering the Kuvira redemption arc, but Azula is obviously in play when you consider characters. To me, I don't think they're just forever going to commit to the idea that she is too far gone, that she is inherently evil and can never like come back. So maybe not full redemption, but for sure there is a character growth arc for Azula coming, I think, where Azula will change. Is she going to become the new member of Team Avatar and join everyone on all their missions? I don't think so, but I think they're going to find some place for her. And again, a lot of this really depends on, a lot of the setup work that Jean Yang did in The Search and Smoke and Shadow. That story clearly is suggesting one path, which is that a more sane Azula who fixes things with her mother and is more allied with our characters could be the ideal advisor to Zuko. That to me seems like a perfect, position for her, where you can use her to counter the kind of maybe weaker side of Zuko as a leader, which is that he's always going to at all times try to avoid the Fire Nation going down the path it once went down, to the point where maybe he makes the Fire Nation look weak, and he needs someone who maybe has the opposite perspective to tell him when that is happening at times. And I think that seems ideal. I love the setup from Smoke and Shadow with Azula on that front, and it just needs, basically, to me, whatever they're planning to do with Azula and Ursa. And I've been talking about this for years, because again, like, how many years has it been? Like 5 years, I suppose, at this point, since Smoke and Shadow. They need to come back to it, and I don't know where they're going to come back to it, because it needs time, it needs focus. We need a book where Azula is the main character, whereas like you realize Smoke and Shadow, it really is just Smoke and Shadow Part 3, because Azula only properly reveals herself in the final part, and even then it's only a handful of pages right at the end. So her story is left like right at like a turning point to a degree. They've obviously given themselves time where Azula's going to be the character she is right now for a while, but the fact that she hasn't yet talked to her mother is very telling. She ran away, she didn't talk to Ursa back in The Search, and it hasn't come back up since then. And there's stuff like, how's the whole key reveal going to work with Azula, Ikem, those type of things. How does she feel about Ozai now at this point, given that she's borderline like betrayed him? There's so much with the Azula character where we do need to come back to, and that's why, like, yeah, if they do more ATLA stuff, I'm assuming Azula will have to be a focus at some point, because it would be so weird for them to do a movie and have it be like, here's older Sokka, Suki, Aang, Katara, Toph, and then Azula's just not mentioned. That would be very weird. So yeah. When do you think the first project for Avatar Studios will be in production this year? Okay. Yeah. All they said is production this year. My guess is that they are, based on what was said, like, what was it, like a month and a half ago. They're working on the planning of a lot of stuff now, and they are, I assume, finalizing their ideas for the first couple of projects as we speak over the last few weeks. In that, the guy said, one of the higher ups at Viacom, or Nick, said that we would hear information soon, even though it's still an early stage and they still haven't sorted everything out. Very contradictory statement, but he said we would get information soon. Now, soon obviously is a word where the meaning means very different things to the business people versus us as fans. Very, very different things. So it could be anywhere from like the next month or two to the next 6 months. I think we'll hear something this year. I definitely think we'll hear proper news this year. I think it would be really weird for us to go over a year after just getting this amazing announcement and for just nothing to happen with it, nothing to make it clear that stuff is actually happening. Because I assume there have to be more kind of build-up ideas as well, and it won't just be a case where out of absolutely nowhere it's just, here's a trailer for the next thing and here it is coming out. We'll have to see stuff like the social media channels begin to maybe change and become more of official news sources. Maybe see some Avatar Studios social media accounts pop up. That's the sort of stuff that I'm really interested to see what they do, because right now Avatar social media seems, it really does feel like it's just being run by sort of fans who are official, and it doesn't really feel like it's an official social media channel. It's just sort of like this kind of minorly official thing, and I'm waiting for that to turn, us to get back to a Coronation style thing like we had in the past. That's what I really want to hear about. It is frustrating that it's like hard to speculate about, you know, the specific details, and so on. But yeah, it's just, yeah, I just find it unfortunate that we can't talk about Avatar Studios that much because there's just no extra information. New question. Do you think we'll get another novel? If so, which Avatar? So yeah, I think we will get more novels. Obviously, it seems basically confirmed. How much you read into what the German publisher said or not, it's hard to say. But I think we will get more novels. What will they be on? I'd be surprised if we went straight back to Kyoshi. So I think we are doing something different. I think as a solo book, I think there's definitely enough ground to do a book about Korra. And I think there's enough interest in Korra to just do a solo book covering the later stages of his life. So basically, from him, like basically the events just prior to and him meeting Umi and what happens afterwards. That to me seems like ideal for like a one-shot book. But the one thing I'd say there is that you probably would want FCE to write it, and I don't know if he's necessarily going to come back in straight away as the writer. So I'd be more inclined to believe they'll go somewhere different with the novels. The question really is like, will they take a risk with the books? Will they just do another Avatar, or will they be like, here's an Avatar you've never heard about before, ever? Not one of the ones that was even named in the Kyoshi novels, like Zito or Salai. What if they just went, boom, brand new Avatar? It's like 3,000-4,000 years ago, so it's in a gap we know absolutely nothing about. And that's obviously my kind of dream thing, where you obviously switch up the dynamics because it's thousands of years ago, but it's still like old school Avatar. It's just, you are now potentially in an area that Four Nations aren't exactly as we directly know it. that would be cool. I'd really like something like that. So next question, will you still review the Avatar comics and novels when Avatar Studio stuff is released? Yep, that is definitely the plan, to cover absolutely everything Avatar. I still would be very shocked if there's ever enough Avatar stuff released consistently where I can't cover it all. And obviously, because Avatar is like my main franchise, like, I struggle to see a scenario where, even if I do feel a bit overloaded, that I just will say, no, this major comic I'm not doing at all. I don't see that happening. Because ultimately the way it's going to work is that the first project likely will be the movie. It'll be at most, I guess, 90 minutes. We'll get it, we'll have that, we'll review it, and then we'll be immediately waiting for whatever's next, which I guess will be a series, and then they have like short form content. And while there'll be overlap with comics and stuff like that, I can't see us ever getting to a point where we have more than, a handful of episodes, an individual comic, and maybe a short to review over the space of like a handful of weeks. That seems crazy at this point in time, but it's still a reasonable amount of content. I just really struggle with the idea where we're just going to be like a novel, 3 comics, shorts, movie, and all this stuff is happening all at the same time. What voice actors? Yeah, like that's obviously going to be a major question about, like, if they do ATLA, what did they do with the cast? Well, it's been long enough to where if you get the same cast back, you have the characters who did the voice who are now older just to do the characters' voices, but older. There's a sort of fitting aspect to that. But you now have also sort of clarified that, like, 40-year-old Aang is voiced by the voice actor they had who did him in Korra. So if they do like early 20s, I don't really see a problem to try and get the original voice actors back. In that, like, like getting Dante back to do Zuko, I don't think is a problem, because like if Iroh 2 is allowed to have the exact same voice as Zuko, older Zuko can have roughly the same voice as well. Again, it depends on what time period they go for. So what else do we have here? Avatar Zito should get his own novel, perhaps. I just worry it might be a little bit boring if we focus on his him sitting at his desk solving the problems of the Fire Nation with forms and that sort of thing, rather than a action adventure style thing. But there's probably some story with Zito to cover that would be exciting. Azula novel, that's always an option. Like, I think the novels are the perfect place to cover some of that stuff where it might be a little bit darker. Like, I think Red Lotus backstory probably is the place, the novels are the place to do that, in that if you're going to potentially have details on, like, Pali potentially being sold into slavery because of her skills and stuff like that, I think the novels are kind of where you're going to tackle that more so than a Avatar Studios show, which I'm guessing will still have the Korra tone, but that they probably in animation will still hold back from going too far with violence and stuff like that. Korra might be hard to market. Kyoshi was successful because she was already pretty popular with the mainstream fans. I'm kind of half thinking that because of the success of Kyoshi and these books being marketed to Kyoshi fans, that Korra has now come out of the Kyoshi novels and is now there and thereabouts as an Avatar people really care about. And especially because what's left of Korra's story is the bit that is related mainly to Avatar. There's still that appeal, but we'll have to wait and see. I want to see an Avatar with a sibling and how that dynamic would play out. All the Avatars we see so far are only child. Yes, that is definitely a dynamic that I think everyone would like to see, is just that idea of potentially the jealous sibling, and how does that work? Or maybe it's good, but then something happens and things change. That's always an interesting dynamic. Or they could do it the reverse of just like, what if the sibling is really, really talented and the Avatar is actually a bit of a slow learner or something like that. That could be interesting. What else do we have here? Yeah, I think like with a big enough project, enough time has passed. I struggle to think you can't pretty much get everyone you need to for like the main cast of Avatar. Um, so I don't think that should be too much of a problem. Um, mm, uh, PG-13 Avatar movie. I'd say that's about the limit if there is anything on this, and a lot depends on if, because it's all going to go on Paramount Plus, it kind of that negates the fact that it's a Nickelodeon property, and because it's going to go straight to streaming, they can be a little bit more like adventurous with it, or do they still think it's Avatar, therefore it's Nickelodeon, therefore it can only go up to this value? I'm not sure. I still think they'll roughly keep it the same as Korra, where Korra was a little bit darker tonally than Avatar at times, but they maybe won't quite go as far as the novels, Kyoshi novels have, just with regards to, like, people get killed by bending attacks, and while it happens in Avatar, they're very careful to mask it and talk around what has happened with like Jet's death and stuff like that. Whereas, can we imagine something like the death of Kelsong happening in an Avatar animation, where just someone goes, sliver of earth, neck cut, dead on the spot? Like, obviously they did what they did to Pali, but they cut away from it, they didn't show it to you. Something like that, of like neck getting cut, you kind of would have to be a little bit more visual with it. And it kind of helped that in a way you didn't know Pali that well, so the brutal death wasn't as like crazy impactful as like if the Kyoshi novels were animated. Like, Kelsong is kind of one of your main cast members initially, and so his death is a pretty major thing on the story. So it's kind of interesting. So yeah, that's all that sort of stuff. And then just overall, like, I definitely think they'll leave room for some series to be a little bit more, because I think they have to acknowledge at this point that a lot of the fandom is fandom that has stuck around for since the show started, and that, like, if you were a kid back when ATLA aired, you are now an adult and would like to see the show grow up with you to a little bit. I'm not sure if I quite agree with the sentiment of like, I want to see 18 plus Avatar. That to me is maybe going a little bit away from what we necessarily want, but certain stories might require the age rating to go up just like a little bit. But yeah. And yeah, it's stuff like that. The character's getting like just covered in blood, even if it's not like a bad injury, just blood. And it's what made just the little effects like that. Like, that's what made the Korra and Tarlok fight so good, was seeing Korra get cut during that fight. Even though she doesn't, like, they don't really show blood as such, but they show like she's cut by it. Gets across that it's a really, really violent fight. That, like, if she's not blocking or dodging all of these, she's going to get impaled by them. But, visually showing that sort of stuff. Do you need to quite go as far as, like, say, what's that recent show on Amazon Prime, Invincible, and be like really bloody and violent in like a superhero scenario? I don't think so. I don't think we necessarily want to see that. Though some people might. I don't think we need to see, the violence bending can do when taken to its next level. That might be a little bit extreme, and I don't think they'll go that far, because Nickelodeon, the name Nickelodeon, is still going to be attached somewhere along the path to whatever new thing comes out. So there's that. So yeah, there's that. So yeah, we're we've done roughly about the same time as we've done for the other live streams. So I suppose any final questions before I kind of wrap this up? Yeah, like I'm enjoying Invincible, but like, oh, I'm definitely kind of half watching through my hands there at some of the fight scenes because they they maybe go too far too quick some of the times, and it's just like cool it down a little bit. Let's see what we have here. Okay, so thanks for the super chat there, Gersharon Man. And yeah, like the plan is like I do want to do streams. There won't be a stream next week just because I want next weekend to devote that time sort of to doing the podcast. Now the podcast is probably just going to be a sort of news summary podcast. I don't think we have a specific topic, and I don't want to commit to doing the podcast live. But the plan would be like after the week off next week, do a stream the next week. I don't know exactly what topic I'm going to do. That's something I will discuss, I guess, with I might put up a channel post with the channel members or something like that, to discuss where we're going next. Someone asked there, would you do an avatar top list? I'm assuming by that you mean basically this sort of ranking list, but for the avatars. Again, I think I saw some of the channel members asking me about that. My thoughts are that to me is probably like the toughest list to do, to try and compare all of the different avatars against each other and create an ordered list in the same way that we're doing here. I think it just gets so tricky because fundamentally they all have the same kind of 4 element style, and then there's only a handful of avatars who we know in detail enough about to like talk about in depth. And then, you know, Kyoshi stands out because of her power. Korra's got metal bending, and then, you know, there's always an element of like the popularity contest thing, and I just worry that like there's not really too much like nuance to get into necessarily with the avatars. In that I think across all the element list and the non-bender list, we were able to get into the weeds, into the details, because it's one specific thing. It's firebending, it's earthbending, and we can discuss how the characters do that well. But then you're getting into situations where like, oh well, you know, Korra does like firebending really, really, really well, and her firebending is like better than like Aang's firebending, but Aang's airbending is better than Kyoshi's like airbending, and it's just like head exploding with the amount of comparison points of like what we were discussing here was like the value of Asami being able to take out like multiple like guard characters with ease versus Sokka being able to take out a bunch of like minor characters who are named with ease. Like, which do you value more or less? And, you know, does Ty Lee taking out a bunch of Earth Kingdom troops, is that better than Suki's solo capture of the Warden? And I think it just gets even more complicated with the avatars. Top villains, you know, do we want to do it all about lists? Like I have ideas for streams. Like I'd love to do some sort of a like trivia stream thing where like obviously it would be impossible to score it properly and stuff like that. But just like a fun thing where like you keep score yourself. The problem with that is just that like I struggle so much with coming up with good questions. But because it would be a sort of live stream trivia thing, it might be a little bit more fun because, you know, I can then pretty much like time like how long you have to do the question, so like people can't really look up stuff versus the way I kind of did it before. So I always have sort of ideas like that. Maybe I could, you know, if when I come up with a few more questions, we can do like a trivia stream. Um, uh, just so every stream isn't just a list that we're trying to make. But I get why people like the list. For sure. We'll see what type of topics. Again, we're gonna have to have that discussion. Like I said, podcast next week, and then streams will come back after that. And like I said, mainly streams are here for what was I gonna say? Going into the future, when there will be massive pieces of news that, like, say, when we do get the first proper announcement or first trailer for Avatar Studios stuff, that I can do like a live stream reaction stream where we can all just be like, boom, we go live to talk about the news, rather than me just making a video and putting it live and discussing in the comments, stuff like that. When we get the big pieces of news, that sort of thing, and then maybe depending on how to do the releases for episodes and stuff like that, once they start to come out, we can do streams for that sort of stuff. But like right now, it's kind of like, yeah, a lot is dependent on the content and how it all works. But, you know, I'll find some clever ways to do different streams and so on. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I want to talk about here. So yeah, I think probably everyone who participated in it, especially me, we're probably done with debating power levels of characters and skill sets for quite a while now. I think I realize now why I roughly took like a 5 year, was it 5 years? Like, yeah, 4 or 5 year break between doing the lists and then doing them again. So it'll probably be that again until we get some more characters or more content with some of the other characters. So yeah, like I said earlier on, probably be a video during the week that will act as like a recap for all of these live streams, going over what the lists were, just so you guys don't need to constantly kind of bring up the live stream to see what the list that we made actually was. Instead, the 5 lists are just there in this one video that will just briefly be going over how we made it. So yeah, I guess thanks everyone for joining me on the stream here today. But yeah, that's been the stream. Thanks for watching, and bye. Okay. How do I end this?